Hello, everyone. I am stranded from COVID Island, and no, I tested positive for COVID on Saturday morning, and that's when I started to show symptoms. So I'm coming to you today via video. Hey, we are starting a brand new series today called Resolving Everyday Conflict, and I am so excited about this series. And some of you may be new and you're thinking to yourself, what is a church-wide series? Well, once a year around winter time, we as a church study the same topic overall. Last year we studied the Red Sea rules. Do you remember that? This year we're studying resolving everyday conflict. You say, well, Steve, how do I get involved? Number one, get the book. And what I love about the book is it's just this short little book that's easy to read, but it's very powerful. Number two, come on Sunday mornings, and we're going to be talking about this material. And number three, and most importantly, get involved in a process group. If you have not been in a process group yet, I just want to encourage you, it's not too late. And you say, Steve, how do I grow? I really want to grow in 2022. How do I really grow in my faith? How do I sink my roots deep in my faith? I'll tell you the number one thing, get in a process group. And we have process groups going on just about every day of the week. How many of you are looking forward to spring? No, spring is my favorite time of the year. I'm already looking forward to it. But I love Easter. I love flowers. I love the freshness and the newness of spring. But with spring also comes those bright yellow weeds that can overtake a yard. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? Yes, dandelions. Now think about if there was a dandelion in your yard. How would you try to get rid of it? Would you take out the scissor and snip it above ground? Or secondly, would you go underground and try to get that dandelion at the root? And by the way, their roots can be 6 to 7 inches long, I discovered. We all know that the best way to approach a dandelion is to get it at the root. Why? If you don't get it at the root, it'll grow back. And today what we're going to talk about is dealing with the dandelion of division. Now, if you were to imagine that the dandelions in a yard is like conflict, wouldn't you agree that there is a lot of dandelions of division in our collective yard? It seems like everywhere you look, there's conflict, there's strife, there's hatred. You know, this past summer I was trying to understand the new reality because of COVID, the pandemic, and I'm like, what is the new reality? So I went on a listening campaign and I asked people, what is the biggest thing you're struggling with? The number one answer, by far, was division. People talked about being divided over masks and mandates and vaccines and politics. And it's as if we in America have lost the ability to disagree without drawing blood, to disagree without demonizing people. Often it's us versus them, and I demonize them. Listen to what one person said. They said, I'm deeply disturbed by the way in which all of our cultures are demonizing the other. The worst arrows in human history start like this, with negative otherizing. I've never heard that phrase before. Negative otherizing. And then they morph into violent extremism. How do we get rid of the dandelions of division in our collective yard? How do we go from a house divided to a house united? How do we resolve conflict so it doesn't dissolve our relationships? That's why we're starting this new series. And guys, I really want to encourage you to get involved in this series. One of the most important skills that I can think of is learning how to deal with conflict. You say, well, Steve, I hate conflict. Why would I want to be a part of a series where we study conflict? Listen to me. The very reason why you don't want to be a part of this series is the very reason you need to be a part of this series. Guys, I hate conflict. I am one of those personalities that just despise unresolved conflict. But the reason I've learned to deal with conflict is not because I like conflict, but because I like unity. See, I am willing to go, watch this, through the dark tunnel of conflict resolution because I know it will lead to the bright light of unity. I am willing to go through the dark tunnel of conflict resolution because I know it will lead to the bright light of unity. So in this series, we're going to talk about how to resolve conflict properly. You know, it's been said that the issue is not necessarily the issue. So some of you are in a fight, or I call them an intense moment of fellowship, with your significant other, and you think that's the issue. But I want to suggest to you the deeper issue is not knowing how to resolve conflict. Guys, this is such an important series. I want to encourage you to invest your time in the next 8 weeks to learn how to be a peacemaker. Now, let me just share with you something that I learned a long time ago that is so important, and here it is. The external issue is rarely the issue. It's symptomatic of a deeper issue. The external issue is rarely the issue. It's symptomatic of a deeper issue. I remember one time Tammy and the kids and I went canoeing, and we got the canoe in the water, and you could hear the rambling water, and you could see the sun, and there was kind of that fishy smell. And we're going down the river, and I noticed that Tammy has less than a stellar attitude. And I thought, must be something with the canoe. Well, we got home, and I said, honey, what was wrong? You seem to have a bad attitude. And she said, Steve, you know that I don't like canoeing. So when you chose canoeing as our family activity, it made me feel unimportant. I remember writing in my journal that afternoon, it's not about the canoe. It wasn't about the canoe. It was, I made her feel unloved. The external issue is rarely ever the issue. It's symptomatic of a deeper issue. So with all that in mind, today we're going to talk about how to deal with these dandelions of division in our homes, in our community, in our neighborhood, and in our world. And to do that, just like getting rid of a dandelion, you have to go to the root. We're going to talk about the 7 root causes of conflict. You may want to write these down. And the first root cause is frustrated desire. Now, we all have desires, longings, cravings, and God has given us them. But it says in the Bible, what causes fights and quarrels among you? This is James chapter 4, verses 1 through 2. Don't they come from your desires? Now circle that word desires. That battle within you. You want something but don't get it. You kill and covet, but you cannot have what you want. You quarrel and fight. Notice that James says at the root of most conflict are our desires. They're frustrated by someone. You know, I think about my dogs. You've all heard of Brock and Bennett, and these hound dogs with big ears. And Bennett, his forehead kind of looks like a raisin, and he's clingy and needy and affectionate. And Brock's kind of more aloof and chill. And these guys are attached at the hip. I mean, I'm seriously concerned if something happened to one of them. I'm not sure how long the other one would be alive. They are just lovey-dovey. But something can happen that causes them to draw blood. What is it? We get out a bone. We get out some food, and they both want it. They both have that desire. And they're willing to fight each other to get it. If you're wrestling with a conflict today, have you ever thought about asking the question, what desire of mine is being frustrated? Now, the second root cause of conflict is pride. Now, notice what it says in Proverbs 13:10. Pride breeds quarrels. Pride, unhealthy pride, leads to strife, disagreement, fights, arguments. You say, well, Steve, I have a pride in my children. Am I not supposed to have that kind of pride? No. When it talks about pride in this verse, it's talking about, quote, contempt for others' opinions, a clash of competing and unyielding personalities, an unyielding arrogance, such an inflated, watch this, know-it-all view of oneself leads to quarreling. What is the opposite? Humility. One who is willing to learn and take advice. Is it possible that at the root of your conflict today is unhealthy pride? My knowledge is up here, your knowledge is down there. I know every answer to every question that has ever been asked or will be asked. Is pride at the root of your conflict today? I remember reading a t-shirt and it said, I'm not arguing with you, I'm just explaining why I'm right. The external issue is rarely the issue. It's symptomatic of a deeper issue. Frustrated desires. Pride. Number 3, selfishness. Now going back to our text, James 4:1 says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You want something but don't get it. You kill and covet, but you cannot have what you want. You quarrel and fight. Notice you. We flip it around. I want. I kill. I quarrel. I. Is selfishness at the root of the conflict going on in your life? What is selfishness? Quote, it's being overly concerned with one's own interests and having little concern for others. You know, the Bible says that the core human problem is sin. What is the middle letter of sin? I. Guys, one of the reasons why spiritual growth is so important to me is that I, by nature, am a selfish person. And here's what I've discovered. When I abide in Christ and He abides in me, when I take my relationship with Jesus seriously, when He's a priority, I'm less selfish. See, selfishness and Jesus cannot be roommates in your heart. One or the other will prevail. Jesus and selfishness are polar opposites. That's why Paul says, I have been crucified with Christ. It's no longer I that live, but Christ that lives within me. What destroys your life? What destroys my life? Selfishness. That's why it's so important to make your relationship with Jesus such a priority, because as you abide in Him, He comes to live within you and live His life through you and helps you to not be, and helps me not to be selfish. Is it possible that at the root of that conflict you're dealing with is selfishness? Now the fourth root is limited resources. When I think of this story in the Old Testament. It's a story about Abraham, who was the founder of the Jewish nation. He was also a wealthy livestock owner. There was another man named Lot, and Lot was a successful businessman. And they were both making the 700-mile trip from, where was it from? I'll find it in a second. From Egypt to Negev. So they're making this 700 trip from Egypt to Negev. And they both have their herds, their families. And what's interesting is that the land doesn't have enough resources for both of them. There's not enough water, there's not enough land. And as a result, conflict erupts. Why? Limited resources. Maybe limited resources are at the root of your conflict. Maybe you and your spouse are arguing over money. You don't have enough month. You have more month left over at the end of your money. Maybe you have limited time and you're arguing how that time should be spent. Limited resources can lead to conflict. Now, the next thing that can lead to conflict, today we're talking about the roots. The external issue is rarely ever the issue. It's symptomatic of something deeper. It's not about the canoe. The next root of conflict is different values. Now, a good example of this is how Paul and Barnabas split ways. Now, we all know who Paul is. Who is Barnabas? Barnabas was this guy who went with Paul on a missionary journey, his first missionary journey. And he's known as being the encourager, Barnabas. In Asia Minor, there was Paul, there was Barnabas, and there was this guy named John Mark. And John Mark left the team in Asia Minor. Paul saw that as a breach of disloyalty, as a breach of loyalty. He's disloyal. Now, Barnabas valued forgiveness. Come on, Paul, let's give him a second chance. So Paul valued loyalty. Barnabas valued forgiveness. And they butted heads. And notice what it says in Acts 15:39. They had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. I don't know about you, but that gives me hope that even the great apostle Paul, even Barnabas, got into conflict. In fact, this conflict was so sharp that they ended up parting ways. Why? Different values. I mean, if you value tradition and this person values creativity, if you value the Bible as your authority and this person doesn't, if you value dogs in the house and this person dogs outside, different values, is it possible that at the root of your conflict today is different values? Now, the sixth root of conflict is the root of diversity. Now, listen to this. Look up here for a moment. Variety is the spice of life. It's also the spark of conflict. A lot of our conflict comes from diversity. You know, I think about my wife and I, Tammy. Guys, we literally could not be any more different from one another. I mean, I'm an introvert, she's an extrovert. She's into adventure, I'm into caution. I'm a male, she's a female. I mean, literally the only thing we have in common is our love for each other and our love for Jesus. In fact, one day she came to me and she said, "Steve, you want to jump out of an airplane with me?" I was like, why would anyone want to do that? So we compromised and I said, okay, I'll go along with you and pray and take pictures, but you jump out of the airplane. And she went up tandem with this person. I remember the airplane went high in the sky and I saw my wife way up there. It was like a dot. And then all of a sudden this dot is coming closer and closer and closer. And to her, that's a good time. To me, that is terror. You know, when I want to think about what my wife is thinking about on an issue, I think about what I think. And then I think the exact opposite, and I know that's probably what she's thinking. And you know, I have to be real transparent with you. Because of our differences, guys, we've gone through some severe times in our marriage. If it wasn't for the grace of God, we probably wouldn't still be together. The reason I share that with you is I don't pretend to be up here and have a perfect marriage. I don't pretend to have a perfect family. Don't you ever put me on a pedestal. Put me on your prayer list. But is diversity at the root of your present conflict? You know, someone has said people are brought into our lives to enrich us with their differences. Now, in a marriage counseling session, the counselor asked this question: what percentage of conflict for the average couple is perpetual or ongoing? You think about that. What percentage of conflict in an average marriage is perpetual or ongoing? Answer? 70%. So if 70% is perpetual or ongoing, 30% is solvable. What does that mean? You and I are going to be arguing and having conflict with our spouse over the similar issues. Would anyone like to give a testimony? I mean, Tammy and I will never get to a place where we agree on she wants adventure and I want safety, right? That's a perpetual conflict. But the issue is not if we'll have conflict. The issue is, will we deal with it in a respectful way? And that's what this series is all about. Now, the final root of conflict is misunderstanding. Now, when we went to Israel a few years back, one of the things that was so challenging is that we speak English, and the people we we didn't run over anyone that I'm aware of, but the people we ran into in Israel, most of them spoke Hebrew. And I remember being on the road and the signs were in Hebrew, and I remember just thinking to myself, I'm so frustrated because it's like we just can't communicate. We're speaking different languages. Do you ever feel that way in your marriage? It's like my spouse and I are speaking different languages. My teenager and I we're speaking different languages. My boss and I were speaking different, and you're just like, why don't you just understand? Often at the root of conflict is a misunderstanding. In fact, I heard once that 80% of conflict could be resolved if people just took the time to listen and understand one another. So what do we do with this information? Today we've talked about the external issue is rarely ever the issue. It's symptomatic of a deeper issue. It's not about the canoe. I want to encourage you to think about those 7 root causes. Frustrated desires, pride, selfishness, limited resources, different values, diversity, misunderstanding. Is that at the root of the conflict you're in now? Is that at the root of many of your conflicts? Just say, Lord, what roots am I struggling with? And then just be honest with the Lord. Say, Lord, I struggle with selfishness. I struggle with pride. Please remove this from me. What if we all made a decision? What if we all made a decision to really get involved in this series in the next month? Could you imagine if we learned how to clear up those dandelions of division in our yard? Could you imagine if when the spark of conflict was lit, we didn't put gasoline on it, we put water? Could you imagine if we began to realize that it's not about getting them above ground, the dandelions of division, it's getting at the root? What if we began to understand that the external issue is rarely ever the issue, but it's a symptom of a deeper issue? It's not about the canoe. Would you pray with me? Lord, thank you for just leading us to do this series, to be peacemakers in our world. God, I know that there are some unresolved conflicts in our lives. And Lord, I just pray for your grace to help those conflicts be dealt with in a respectful, Christ-honoring way. Lord, I pray for anyone today that has lost hope, that you would give them hope. Thank you that you are the God of all hope. Oh God, help us to deal with conflict in a Christ-like, respectful way. I ask this in your name, and everyone said, Amen. Have a great week. I wish I could be with you, but God bless, and I'll see you soon.